Hey everybody, Keep7 here, back with another Magic the Gathering Arena video, and in today's video, we are just going to be talking about three cards, or two cards really, that you should have crafted by now, and then one honorable mention. Kaldheim has been out for about 5 or 6 days, maybe a week now, and there are two very standout cards that are extremely powerful and have been overperforming. And I think there's a lot of buzz about these two cards specifically. And then there's a third card that I'm going to mention that is definitely worth crafting. Although I don't think it is near as powerful as the other two. But without further ado, let's get into it.
So the first card we're going to be talking about is Goldspan Dragon. Goldspan Dragon is a 5 mana, 3 and 2 red dragon creature with flying and haste. It has whenever Goldspan Dragon attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. And treasure tokens you control have tap it, sacrifice this artifact, and add 2 mana of any one color. As opposed to, obviously, normally treasure tokens are sacrifice them, add 1 mana. So this card, I think, is far and away, if not tied with, then is the best card in Kaldheim. Or at the very least, I think probably the most fun and one of the most creative cards in the entire set. It's Mythic, and I think it's absolutely worth 4 Mythic wildcards. If you have the wildcards, available, and you're not saving up for anything else, you're just, if you have a pretty complete collection and you're just trying to collect on Kaldheim now, I would say this is absolutely worth a 4 of craft of your Mythic wildcards. This is an extremely great card. It's very creative. It's fun to play. There was a deck that came out, an Is It Tempo deck, LSV. I'll put up a picture so you can take a look at it. Created a version of this tempo deck that has been iterated on since by a lot of streamers and other pro players. It's a very cool deck. Essentially, what it is you play a very tempo oriented game for the first 3 to 4 turns, and then on turn 5 you can get a Goldspan Dragon down, and because you have technically 2 mana held up, if you can attack with him, you can protect him immediately with some sort of counter magic, either with Saw It Coming or a negate, something of that nature. So it's a dragon that can protect itself almost immediately, and it creates a lot of value for you in just generating treasure tokens that you can spend on whatever it is that you might want. Has a lot of burn spells. It is basically, it is kind of boosted a lot by the lingering set that everybody complains about. Eldraine features 4 Brazen Borrowers and 4 Bone Crusher Giants. But as far as 8 cards from Eldraine is obviously a lot, and Eldraine is still making its mark on Standard, even this far into the future after it had been released almost over a year ago, about a year ago. But nonetheless, I mean, it's just a fantastic and fun tempo deck that has a big dragon as its top end that can protect itself, and is a 4/4 flying haste. It's interesting because I never thought that a flying haster that's mana cost was higher than its power and toughness would really make an impact. But the treasure token aspect of the card is extremely creative and very fun to play with and play around. So if you have 4 Mythic wildcards, craft this card. And again, I should put a picture up of the LSV deck so you can take a look at it, and I would highly recommend just giving that deck a shot and just playing around with this card. I mean, I think it can go in obviously a lot more than just that tempo deck. I think there's a lot of different places that this card can be played. Next card, Showdown of the Skalds. So this is a rare, and I'd say this is the best rare in the set. So if Goldspan Dragon was the best Mythic, spend your Mythic wildcards on that. Now let's talk about the best rare. This is far and away, I think, the best rare in the entire set, and can be put in, again, it's not only that it can be put in a lot of places, it's that it's an extremely powerful card. So let's get into it. Showdown of the Skalds, 4 mana, 2, a red, and a white. It's an enchantment saga with 3 chapters. Chapter 1, exile the top 4 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. Chapters 2 and 3, whenever you cast a spell this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So chapter 1 is something I had mentioned during spoilers that I thought was extremely powerful. Exiling the top X cards of your library is always extremely good. Essentially, that's just card draw. Obviously, it gives you a limited time where you can play those cards, but you have 4 cards that you draw, and it doesn't, even if you lose them, it gives you the option to play them. So that is essentially card draw. And drawing the top 4 cards of your library is extremely good. It helps you either hit your land drops or let you play a powerful spell. And then, don't forget that on that next turn, turns 2 and 3, when you cast those spells, you get +1/+1 counters on target creatures, which, although isn't, it might not be the best value in the world, it is still extremely powerful and can absolutely turn the tide in a game. This card goes in Jeskai Yorion. This card can go in Boros aggro. This card can go in mono red aggro, splash for this. I'm seeing people, put this in, mono red burn or, red deck winds decks. I'm seeing people splash for white in their Gruul aggro decks to include this, and then other cards like Shepherd of the Flock. So people are getting really excited about this card. This card is extremely good, extremely powerful, goes in a lot of decks, and some people are even splashing white in their decks just to fit this in. It's that good. So if you're gonna spend 8 wild cards only, 4 on Mythics and 4 on a Mythic and 4 on a Rare, spend 4 on Goldspan Dragon and spend the other 4, I would say, on Showdown of the Skalds. The applications of this card are endless. You can put it pretty much anywhere. Experiment for yourself. Where you want to put this in and what kind of decks you want to make this with, but this is absolutely something you can build around. So yeah, that's my recommendation for if you're going to spend only 4 rares and 4 mythics up to this point. I would spend them on those cards and then save your rest for, if you're building a specific deck or anything like that. But these are cards that you're going to be seeing most likely every day. So the third and final card, which is really an honorable mention, but it is an uncommon. So I would, if you have uncommon wild cards, spend it on this. So we have 4 mythics for Goldspan Dragon, 4 rares for Showdown of the Skalds. I would spend 4 uncommons on this card, and it is Binding of the Old Gods. It is a 4 mana, 2, a black, and a green enchantment saga with 3 chapters. Chapter 1, destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Chapter 2, search your library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. And Chapter 3, creatures you control gain death touch until end of turn. So the third chapter is, not great, not bad, but it's the first 2 chapters that are really, really important. Destroying a target non-land permanent. Essentially, I think really how to boil this card down is it's an Elspeth Conquers Death for Golgari, or a deck that includes the Golgari colors. I don't think this is as powerful as Elspeth Conquers Death. I mean, for 1 more mana, Elspeth Conquers Death does a lot more. It brings something back from the graveyard with a +1/+1 counter. It includes that major tax, but this is kind of a little bit of an inverse. I mean, they both are powerful removal on Chapter 1, and that's undeniable. Elspeth Conquers Death and this card, both of their Chapter 1s are extremely powerful, and I would say pretty comparable. Elspeth Conquers Death does exile, so it does have a leg up there. And obviously both have a variety of targets, which I think is what makes them comparable. So Elspeth Conquers Death for 1 extra mana does exile something, which is great. But if you're playing in Golgari colors, I don't see any other, I don't see much better removal. I mean, you have Mythos of Nethroi and things like that, but destroy target non-land permanent is just fantastic in that number 1 chapter slot. In Chapter 2, although it seems kind of maybe just a throw-in as a Chapter 2, it's actually extremely powerful. Getting an additional tapped land on the second chapter of this, it allows you to search your library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield tap, but you can still play a land on that turn, so you're accelerating your mana extremely well. If this is played on turn 4, on turn 5 you've put down 2 more lands. You're up to what? You're up to 6 lands or 7 lands by turn 5 or 6. So, you're really boosting your mana availability, and your mana acceleration is skyrocketing with this card. So, and then obviously Chapter 3, if you have anything on the battlefield, you can give Death Touch. That's great, whatever. Maybe you get rid of one of their blockers. Maybe you can attack with, with something that, I don't know. I really think Chapter 3 is truly the throw-in. I don't think it's particularly extremely important, but at the very least it can provide you with some removal if you need it. Obviously Death Touch is just fancy fancy form of removal, but makes you trade a creature potentially. If it was creatures you control gain, put a death touch counter on a target creature you control, I think that would be a lot better. Obviously, because you just get death touch on one of your creatures. Getting it till end of turn is kind of meh. Especially when it's on your turn. I feel like death touch is always better as a defensive threat as opposed to an offensive threat. So getting it until the end of your turn is kind of it's really what I think separates. If the third chapter was target creature you control gets a death touch counter, I think this would have been a rare as opposed to an uncommon, because I think that would be a lot more powerful, just giving something you have a death touch counter, meaning that, if they don't have trample, you just, you could have a 1/1 that just has a death touch counter, and now you have a removal spell essentially on the board. So I think that might be what separates this, why that makes this an uncommon. But again, irregardless, I think giving something death touch until end of turn isn't bad, isn't great, but the rest of the card is great. So if you have 4 uncommons, absolutely go out there and spend them on Binding of the Old Gods if you're working with Golgari. I already spent a couple uncommons and included this in a few Golgari decks, and it has overperformed a lot for me. Just to put it in perspective, into perspective for you, if you're up against Gruul Aggro, Gruul Adventures, targeting a non-land permanent is so much better than targeting a specific, creature. Although it is really important to keep the board clear of creatures against Gruul Aggro, if the difference between you stabilizing and not stabilizing is one of their creatures has, if they have a Great Henge on the battlefield, or if they have an Embercleave attached to something, if you can stabilize the board by just getting rid of an Embercleave, getting rid of a Great Henge or something like that, and all you have is just creature removal, obviously this is just a step up from that. And then the additional chapters are just bonus. But I don't know if I would say that this is better than Mythos of Nethroi. It's this chapter 1 versus Mythos of Nethroi. They do the same thing. Mythos of Nethroi obviously requires you to include white mana. So if you're just playing in Golgari, obviously this is extremely good. If you're playing in Abzan, maybe Mythos might just be the better include because it's cheaper. But again, that chapter 2 is very powerful. So if you're deciding between the two, maybe you do a mix of both. Maybe you do 2 Mythos of Nethroi in your deck and 2 of these, just for the additional ramp. Another thing to consider with Binding of the Old Gods. Sorry, Golgari is like my favorite color combination. It's the Golgari midrange is the deck I brew the most, and I like to upgrade the most and play the most. So I'm just kind of thinking of ideas here. A lot of my Golgari mid-range decks include 2 copies or 1 copy or 3 copies of Cultivate to help ramp through, and essentially I can cut those out now and include Binding of the Old Gods instead. Gives me more removal and gives me the ramp that I want. So any of you who are like me who have copies of Cultivate in your Golgari decks, you can just remove it and include this instead. It also it declogs that 3-drop spot and lets you include a lot more in the 4-drop slot, essentially including more removal and ramp for the price of just removing. And Cultivate always felt kind of like a not so great card in the Golgari mid-range decks that I was brewing and playing with. And then maybe if you're playing like Golgari ramp or something. So it gets rid of a kind of a clunky card in your deck and includes absolute gas. So yeah, if I were you, if you were playing straight up Golgari, or if you're playing like Abzan, if you're playing like Yori and Abzan, this is a great card and it's uncommon, so spend 4 wild cards on it. And yeah, so that'll about do it. That is the uncommon, the rare, and the mythic wild card that if I were you, I would spend 4 copies of wild cards on today. Go out and do that, and you will not regret it. These cards are overperforming across the board. They are doing absolutely fantastic. These are cards you will see people build entire decks around. These are cards, well, not necessarily, but these are cards that are absolute includes in decks in these colors. So keep an eye out for them. You're going to see them every day. They're really powerful. And yeah, go out and enjoy. Thanks, everybody.